They tried to reverse the message. I can't speak. So today I have an amazing story about a 23-year-old, his mama, women's suffrage, and a letter that changed the course of American history. My name is Micah Nicole, and I like to make videos about American history and some things that your teacher may have never told you before. So today I'm sporting this lovely shirt, which my one sister has aptly christened the Dwight Schrute shirt. So there are plenty of times in history where it comes down to one moment and one person that changes the course of all future events. And in the case of women's suffrage in the United States, that happens to be a very charming and very handsome young Tennessee legislator by the name of Harry T. Bern, or rather his mama, Mrs. Febb. As per usual, we have to give you a little bit of backstory. Around the time of World War I, the women's suffrage movement went nuts. There were marches and rallies and protests and even one very hairy situation with a couple of the national women's suffrage leaders and imprisonment and hunger strikes and Woodrow Wilson. It was a mess, to be honest, and emotions were at high intensity. So by the time that World War I came to an end, there were several states, mostly Western states, that had already given women the right to vote, whether that be partial or full suffrage. But there was still no national law that gave women the right to vote across all of the states. So that was partly what they were pushing for. The leaders were pushing for a national amendment to the Constitution that would give women the right to vote. And it was a long and drawn-out ordeal. And it had started several decades earlier and had failed. And it wasn't until after World War I in which the 19th Amendment went before the U.S. House and Senate. So finally, after several failures and revotes, the hotly contested amendment passed both U.S. houses. The simple 39-word emendation, nicknamed the Susan B. Anthony Amendment after prominent abolitionist and women's rights activist Susan B. Anthony, passed from both federal houses and moved on to be ratified by the states. Now, if you remember your civics, it didn't just stop there, because according to the Constitution, 3/4 of the states have to ratify the amendment, saying that they agree, and it's then added to the Constitution. In 1919, 3/4 of the states equaled 36. So they needed 36 states to sign on to this amendment. It was really hotly contested, and there was several of the western states automatically signed on, and there were a couple of states in the east like New York and Illinois that signed on, but by and large there were a lot of states that just flat out rejected it. But they still kept getting traction on it. By the springtime of 1920, 35 states had said yes. They just needed one more state to sign on. And that's where we get to the summer of 1920 in the state of Tennessee. So as you can imagine, with this thing that had been stirring and brewing for, the better half of a century almost at this point, and all the ruckus that had started up until this point, you can only imagine how much of a nightmare this whole fiasco will be. And it was a huge nightmare. They were looking to Tennessee to see what they would do. Is it going to make that perfect 36 like all the women suffragists were wanting? And it was really crazy. So supporters and opponents of the amendment come flooding into the state of Tennessee, into Nashville. Reporters from all over the country and national leaders like Carrie Chapman Catt and others, they come in to lobby the legislature to ratify this amendment. It's really divided. The supporters are wearing their little yellow flower buttons, and the opponents of suffrage are wearing their red flower buttons, and everybody's wearing their support or their opposition on their chest for this issue. And after weeks and weeks of lobbying, it finally comes to a vote. So it sails through the Senate, no problem. But the House is another story. It comes to the point where it's time for a vote. They're sitting in the House and they're getting ready for this vote. And they vote, and it's a tie. 48 to 48. 4 against. And there's all these people sitting in the gallery and all these suffragists looking down, waiting, and just wondering, how is this thing gonna happen? And it doesn't look good for women's suffrage. Each side is trying to, get the right number of votes so that they can pass or kill the measure. Needed to vote again to settle the issue because they're at a 48-48 tie. So there on the floor of the Tennessee House of Representatives is a young man by the name of Harry T. Bern, who is a young Republican from East Tennessee who was the youngest member of the Tennessee State Legislature at the time when he was elected at 22 years old. So here is this 23-year-old charming, handsome young gentleman sporting a red boutonniere. Up until this point, Mr. Bern had been voting against women's suffrage because he was the target of this mass anti-suffrage campaign. And he, being the young politician that he is, thought that that's what his constituents wanted. But that's where things get a little bit spicy because, lo and behold, as Mr. Bern is sitting there in the state legislature, he has a letter in his hand from his mama. If anybody is from the South or knows anything about the South, you'll know that mamas have a lot of power because you don't want to make mama mad. And that was no different with Mr. Bern. Mr. Bern had the letter from his mama in his hand that he had just gotten that morning. And in it, his mama wrote to him,
"Dear son, hooray and vote for suffrage, and don't keep them in doubt. I've been waiting to see how you stood, but I have not seen anything yet. Don't forget to be a good boy and help Mrs. Cat with her rats. Is she the one that put rat in ratification? Ha! No more for Mama this time. With lots of love, Mama."
So, what is Bern gonna do? Is he going to vote against suffrage and vote against his mama? Or is he going to listen to his mama and be the deciding vote and ratify the 19th Amendment? Well, in the end, his mama won out, and much to the anti-suffragists' dismay, Mr. Bern voted yes and changed his vote, breaking that 48-48 tie. And with one vote, Tennessee became the final state needed to ratify the 19th Amendment. So, after the vote, a handful of very sore-losing anti-suffrage legislators were trying to pull some parliamentary tricks and try to skirt around the ratification. Even a handful of them tried to flee the state of Tennessee down to Alabama so that they could prevent a quorum from being established. But in the end, none of their games worked, and ratification went through. The governor signed the certification saying that the legislature had passed ratification and sent it off to Washington, D.C. So there's so much that I love about this story. It's so crazy to me how it can come down to something so simple as just a young man getting a letter from his mama. History is a funny thing, and sometimes we think it's super complicated, but all in all, it's just the story of people doing things that people have always done. And this story is no different. So for all of you ladies out there that now get the right to vote in the United States, you can thank a very determined mama and Harry T. Burns who happened to listen to her. I hope you liked my story. Thank you so much for listening. If you've stuck around this far and you like this sort of thing and you find it interesting, hit subscribe down below and give me a like so I know that you've been here. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye! They try to reverse the measure. I can't speak. Why can't I say the word measure? I know that it's odd and it reminds me of a hunting lodge circa 1940, but that's what I love about it, if I'm gonna be honest. I don't know, it's kind of got like a Sherlock Holmes vibe. Doesn't it? Like, it looks a little, like in the woods in a cabin. Or then on Harry T. Feb.